Good afternoon and welcome to Capital Clarity. It's like maybe a few people looked outside of the weather, decided to catch this online today. So everybody watching on Facebook, X, YouTube, and wherever else this is being streamed, good afternoon. As you know, Capital Clarity is a program that brings the people together with lawmakers, elected officials, activists, and other people who are working in the political space so you can know what's going on. It started a few years ago by then Lieutenant Governor Janice McKeon and then Representative Dorothy Moon. Idaho Freedom Foundation picked up the baton and has been carrying it through ever since, and it is my privilege to continue to stand here for you today. Today we're going to be talking a lot about free speech. And it's an issue that seems simple on its surface, but you dig deeper and it gets a little more complex. And the assault on free speech comes in many ways, sometimes from areas you least expect. So I'm not going to take up anybody's thunder, but we have two guests here today. Joining us later will be Senator Brian Lenney, who has some legislation that is related to free speech and protecting yourself and your ability to speak freely without being shut down and censored and canceled in any way. But first, we will be joined by Heather Lauer. She was one of the founders of the Idaho Freedom Foundation way back in 2009, along with Wayne Hoffman. And she's been active in the political space, fighting for freedom and liberty for many years even before that. Today she is the CEO of an organization called People United for Privacy Foundation. And they take on donor privacy. And I'll let her explain the details of that. But she's joining us today all the way from Haley. Hopefully the weather's not too scary today. But please give a round of applause to Heather Lauer.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for the Idaho Freedom Foundation team for having me here today. As Brian mentioned, our focus as an organization at People United for Privacy Foundation is on a single but very important issue, and that is protecting nonprofit donor privacy. Some of you might have seen our mugs that say transparency is for government, privacy is for people floating around the State House. We occasionally see those posted on X, and it always makes our team very happy to see those pop up. So I'm excited to be here today because we can never spend enough time talking about why the First Amendment is so important. And nonprofit donor privacy is a free speech issue. A recent poll from the Cato Institute showed that 62% of Americans self-censor for fear of retribution from sharing their political beliefs. That is not a good place for our country to be from a First Amendment standpoint. Everyone in this room probably understands how cancel culture is impacting the lives of Americans on a daily basis. And there are absolutely examples of people who have been harmed because their support for a nonprofit organization was disclosed. I'd like to share a few stories. Margie Christopherson was a manager at El Coyote in Los Angeles, a nearly 100-year-old Beverly Boulevard restaurant that often has a line of customers waiting to get inside. A devout Mormon, Margie donated $100 in support of Proposition 8, a 2008 ballot initiative to ban same-sex marriage in California. Margie never advertised her politics or religion, but her donation showed up on an exposed donor list. Margie and the restaurant where she worked became a target. A boycott was organized with activists trashing El Coyote on restaurant review websites, and it escalated from there. Next came the protesters, some of them standing outside the restaurant and shouting, "Shame on you," at customers who were going there to eat. One night, police arrived in riot gear because an angry mob had descended on the restaurant. The mob eventually left, and so did customers. Ultimately, Margie lost her job due to the disruption to business caused by the protesters. The hours of other employees were impacted as well. She said, "I've almost had a nervous breakdown. It's been the worst thing that's ever happened to me." That's what she said to a Los Angeles Times reporter who was asking her about her experience. There's another example that many of you are likely familiar with that's more recent. When Canadian truck drivers protested Canada's oppressive COVID vaccination mandate with a freedom convoy, left-wing activists hacked the protest crowdfunding platform and leaked the names of previously anonymous donors. The donors, which included many Americans, soon faced harassment and bullying in the media for their giving. The Washington Post was giddy about getting their hands on this list and exposing small dollar donors to the cause. They highlighted people who had given both $100 and $10,000 to the cause, and the reporter behind the hit piece truly believed he was fulfilling an important service by publicly targeting and harassing Americans for their private giving. He had no shame in his reporting. More recently, after the landmark ruling in Dobbs v. Jackson, many pregnancy crisis centers became the target of arson and vandalism from pro-choice activists. If the names of donors to pro-life causes were publicly disclosed, activists would have had an endless list of targets who could be harassed and intimidated, or worse, at their homes and workplaces. These examples are why it's so dangerous that activists and politicians continue pushing for nonprofit donor disclosure. But what about dark money? You've heard that's a problem, right? I'm here to tell you that the phrase dark money is widely and wildly misunderstood. Dark money is not an official, legal, or technical term. People use it to describe a wide variety of things that they dislike. It is a pejorative label used to smear any group that keeps the personal information of its members and supporters, such as their names, home addresses, and employers, private. Conveniently, for most anti-privacy politicians and activists, something is only dark money when it's on the wrong side. So you also might be wondering, what's the difference between a donation to a candidate and a donation to a cause? Why should the disclosure rules be any different? Disclosure of donations to candidates provides voters with information that is critical to holding their representatives accountable through elections and when they are in public office. Voters should know when there is the potential for a quid pro quo. Disclosure of donors to political candidates is a long-standing tradition in this country that has been affirmed by the Supreme Court multiple times. We are not questioning that in this conversation. However, when it comes to donations to nonprofits, that is a very, very different conversation. You may not like anonymous mailers. You may want to know who the people are behind a group that's running ads. But curiosity is not enough to force disclosure of nonprofit donors and violate our First Amendment right to associate and speak anonymously. This is a tradition that goes back to the founding of our country when the authors of the Federalist Papers used pseudonyms. Donor privacy is who we are fundamentally as Americans. If the government builds and publicizes a database of nonprofit donors, they are creating a permanent record of your beliefs over time, and it makes it very difficult for people to change or evolve their views. That information can also be weaponized against citizens by their own government. Suddenly, you might end up as the target of an investigation by a political opponent. The collection and storage of nonprofit donor data potentially incentivizes weaponized investigations and biased or selective enforcement of laws. In the meantime, because a donor gives to a group who may or may not engage in advocacy on a wide range of issues, or that may engage in limited electioneering activities, that donor is exposed for their personal beliefs, and in the meantime, nothing has been accomplished to prevent corruption. In fact, donor disclosure creates the opposite situation where government officials might use the data for corrupt purposes. It is my belief that there is no legitimate reason for nonprofit donor disclosure. Disclosure will expose donors to the groups you like as much as it will expose donors to the groups that you don't like. There is also Supreme Court precedent that affirms how privacy in nonprofit giving is a First Amendment protected right. There are several cases that address this issue, and I'd like to briefly discuss two of the most important decisions. In 1958, during the height of the Civil Rights era, Alabama sought to prevent the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People from conducting further business in the state. After the circuit court issued a restraining order, the state issued a subpoena for various records, including the NAACP's membership list. In an opinion authored by Supreme Court Justice Harlan, a unanimous court decided in favor of the NAACP, holding that, quote, immunity from state scrutiny of petitioners' membership lists is here so related to the right of petitioners' members to pursue their lawful private interests privately and to associate freely with others in doing so as to come within the protection of the 14th Amendment. Further, the court held that freedom to associate with organizations dedicated to advancement of beliefs and ideas is an inseparable part of the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. Justice Harlan concluded that the states obtaining the names of the NAACP's membership would likely interfere with the free association of its members, so the state's interest in obtaining the records was superseded by the constitutional rights of the petitioners. Fast forward, in 2021, there was a decision in Americans for Prosperity Foundation v. Bonta that was the most recent decision in this area that resulted in a strong pro-privacy outcome. Going back to when Kamala Harris was Attorney General in California, her office had a policy requiring charities to provide the state, on a supposedly confidential basis, information about their major donors, purportedly to help the state protect consumers from fraud and the misuse of their charitable contributions. This was a rule made up by the AG's office. It was not a requirement according to any law in California. Americans for Prosperity challenged this policy and filed a lawsuit alleging that the filing requirement unconstitutionally burdened their First Amendment right to free association by deterring individuals from financially supporting them. Over several years, and costing millions of dollars in legal fees, which most nonprofits in this country don't have to defend their First Amendment rights in situations like this, AFPF was successful in eventually getting a very strong pro-privacy decision from the Supreme Court. The court ruled that California's disclosure requirement is facially invalid because it burdened donors' First Amendment rights and is not narrowly tailored to an important government interest. The AFP case is a perfect example of why government officials can't be trusted with donor data. Besides the First Amendment concerns, the California Attorney General's office has a history of carelessly exposing the confidential donor lists of thousands of nonprofits on public websites after making these demands that groups turn over that highly sensitive information for no clear law enforcement purposes. This is the most important Supreme Court decision on donor privacy since NAACP, and my organization is working to codify that decision into law in all 50 states and hopefully eventually Congress. This fight is what gets my team out of bed every morning. We believe that a full-throated defense of free speech is the only way forward for a country of 330 million people to coexist while debating controversial issues. And we must recognize the vital role that privacy plays in such speech. This isn't a Republican issue. This isn't a Democrat issue. This is an American issue. We work with groups across the political spectrum who agree on the need to defend nonprofit donor privacy. In 2021, Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts mentioned the diversity of groups that were instrumental in the pro-privacy AFPF v. Bonta decision. He said, "The gravity of the privacy concerns in the disclosure context is further underscored by the filings of hundreds of organizations as amici curiae in support of the petitioners. Far from representing uniquely sensitive causes, these organizations span the ideological spectrum and indeed the full range of human endeavors, from the American Civil Liberties Union to the Proposition 8 Legal Defense Fund, from the Council on American Islamic Relations to the Zionist Organization of America. It is not unusual for my organization, People United for Privacy, to partner with both pro-life and pro-choice groups on the same donor privacy protection bills. We also frequently partner with both the ACLU and religious freedom groups, Second Amendment supporters, LGBT advocates, and a wide range of others. We may disagree on every other policy issue, but we can agree on our right to have those debates and to be as public or as private about our support for causes that are engaged in those debates. We must work toward a future where Americans have a culture of agreeing to disagree and where we have laws in place to ensure that First Amendment rights are aggressively defended for everyone. Thank you for your time today. Does anybody have any questions? We'll go back here first.
Hi, my name is Eric. I've lived here in Idaho for 27 years. And you talk about all the regular people who are hurt by this, like the restaurant owner. But to me, what dark money means is out-of-state money coming into my state. Most Idahoans would not want to have a whole bunch of money coming into their state, like if all of a sudden Antifa started dumping millions of dollars into Idaho for a lobbyist group. So last year I came into the Idaho Freedom Foundation, Capitol Clarity like this, and I asked a question, and I was thrown out.
Okay.
So today is the freedom of speech extravaganza, right?
Aren't you with Antifa?
Can I ask the question that I asked then?
Sure.
What I'm worried about is big out-of-state dark money coming into Idaho. So my question then was, what's the percentage of money that Idaho Freedom Foundation gets from out of state? I don't care if regular people give to Idaho, that's fine. I don't care if local businesses give. I care about out-of-state, big out-of-state money coming in and setting up the Idaho Freedom Foundation. So what's the percentage about? Can you tell me?
Well,
You started it.
no, because I believe in donor privacy and I believe in our rights to speak anonymously about issues we care about. And those rights extend to every group in this state, regardless of what issues those groups are focused on or whether or not you like those groups.
But corporations are giving money.
How do you know that?
I don't know, because you won't tell us.
Well, why don't we talk about the issues that Idaho Freedom Foundation is focused on instead of its donors? It's a boogeyman. It's just distracting from debate about important issues facing our country and focusing on the people behind it instead. Those issues are the same issues regardless of who is funding the organization.
So it's okay, so if 95% of the money that supports the Idaho Freedom
Well, that's just not true, but I'm also not going to disclose any information
All
about
I'm
that.
asking is for a percentage.
So I think we probably should move on to the next question.
May I? Sit down and shut up.
Yeah, that's
So,
so, thank you for what you do, and I agree with you, but there's some sort of a mirror image problem. I can understand that people expressing basically their private opinions should be protected, but political donations, I think we agree, are not in that category.
Right.
And I had something of a strange situation that I have a very common name, it's not Bob Robertson, but it's kind of like that. And I was listed as giving a lot of money to a group I would never have given to, and I tracked it down to a post office box, and that was the end of the line. I suggest that is not sunshine, and that is perhaps something that someday somebody should clean up. Because I'd like to know who contributes to political campaigns, and that supposedly is the law, but that procedure, which I think is not rare, makes it very hard to do.
Okay, that's a fair comment. And we agree, we're not debating. Well, we're not debating donations to political candidates here. We're
No,
focused on
but
our
it's an interesting question. It reminds
Yeah,
me
for
of your image problem.
Absolutely.
and my personal perspective is that if you're in government or in politics for any reason, of any kind of politics, even the local dog catcher, it's really important to find out where the money comes from. Because I don't like out-of-state money coming into my state to sway
Well, that's your
politics.
opinion, I disagree. Go ahead.
40%
of it. There's a biblical principle that we can judge a tree by its fruit.
Yeah.
So if we know what the fruit is, I don't think it matters where the money's coming from.
Exactly.
And I have a suggestion for political PACs. And that suggestion is that instead of figuring out where the money's coming from a political PAC, how about there be a requirement that they post the fruit of what they do? So they have to post the flyers they sent out or the handiwork that they do. So we can research sort of what their thread is, what they're trying to accomplish. Because a lot of these political PACs have names that are deceptive.
That's an interesting idea. And it puts it back on the issues that are being debated, not the donors. Yes, Brian.
I had to the out-of-state dark money thing, I got accused in 2022, well, I guess since I've been in office, but in 2022 of taking all this out-of-state dark money because I got several $1,000s from from California people. The out-of-state dark money was my mom, my aunt, my brother, my sister, and let me finish. And two of my cousins. They're just, hey, my son's running for office. Of course they're going to donate to me. So it's like, and that's different because I'm a political candidate. But a lot of this out-of-state dark money stuff, it cuts both ways. I think it's a boogeyman. But I mean, I got accused of people were putting posts. Look at this dark money. I'm like, that's my mom. You want to talk to her? I'll give you her cell phone number. So
That's a good point.
that's one piece of it. A lot of these are just individual people.
Absolutely. I lived out of state for several years while I was also on the board of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. The whole idea that I'm out of state dark money is just absurd.
And it's okay for your mom to get those, nobody cares, none of us, nobody.
Well, some people care because they made a big deal about it, but yeah.
Any other questions?
How does this apply to political action committees?
There are already disclosure laws in place for PACs, and we feel like those are sufficient, and that anything more than that is intruding into these First Amendment rights.
So are you referring to activism? And so activists are the ones who were doing the searching out people and finding who they are and going to their houses and stuff. And so really, it's almost would be interesting to understand where the funding comes for that.
Well, there's a difference between being curious about that and having the right to know it, and that's where the line is for us.
Copy.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Heather, for that great presentation. It's something that we need to talk more about because somewhere along the line, we got this idea on the conservative side that we should know everything about everybody. It's hard to believe that just 30 years ago, they used to publish these big books with white pages that had your name and address and sometimes your family members and your occupation in it. But we've come a long way from there, and we're a much more privacy conscious society right now, especially with as fast as information can travel. I remember the story of a police officer out in one of the eastern states. He donated a very small amount of money to Kyle Rittenhouse's defense fund. Well, the website that was hosting the fund got hacked, and the names of all the donors were released, and he got fired for that. He eventually sued, and they settled, but still, that imagine how many people that happens to. They find out you've donated to something, or you've said something, or you've supported someone else who said something, and then they're going to come after you and destroy your life. I imagine that there's a lot of people out there who would love to get their hands on the list of Idaho Freedom Foundation donors because they'd love to be able to name and shame. How dare you support this extremist group? It's not that it's out of state money, it's that people are curious about which of my neighbors are donating to these people. And I'm sure that happens on the left too. Which of my neighbors are donating to ACLU or Planned Parenthood? And so there's a reason to keep that private. Because we are in a contentious society and we're in a litigious society where people want to sue at the drop of a hat. And that brings us to our next guest. Senator Brian Lenney has a bill to keep you safe from things like that. So, Senator Brian Lenney is from Nampa, and I'm pleased that he's joining us here today.
I don't have a fancy presentation like Heather, but this will be interesting because this bill will be, most likely we'll get, this just passed a committee on Monday, a Senate committee, and then the kind of processes, and it'll go to the floor. So we should debate this on the Senate floor today. We're going to be back on the floor at 4:30. So if you want to watch this, I'm just going to do a prep debate here because it's my same notes I have for the floor. So going on this kind of free speech theme we have going here, I want you to imagine spending 18 months in court and $20,000 in legal fees, or having to take out a home equity line of credit because someone sued you because they didn't like something you posted on a blog. Things of that nature, or being bankrupted or in court for being bankrupted by a lawsuit over, something you said at a town hall, that type of thing. These are real stories I've heard over the past year and a half that I've been looking into this. into this concept called a SLAP lawsuit. A lot of people don't know what that is. It's SLA, and there's 2 Ps. It stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, otherwise known as free speech. So if you think about lawsuits that have to do with, typically they're around things like defamation or slander, which, depending on who you're asking, can be, not a lawyer at all, let me preface that, but those things can be more subjective. There's not as clear of a line sometimes. So a lot of times people will sue someone not to win the case, but just to shut someone up or bankrupt them or keep them tied up in court for months and years, or all of the above. So I have a bill, like I said, it passed the committee on Monday on a 6-3 vote. Senate Bill 1325 is a free speech protection bill that has to do with SLAP lawsuits, and it provides a comprehensive, efficient framework to essentially resolve these types of lawsuits quickly. I said, we heard stories in committee. I've had several stories emailed to me. I learned the hard way not to comment on specific legal cases as they're happening. So, but I've heard tons of stories from people in Idaho, from people outside of Idaho whose lives have been ruined because of these types of lawsuits. And these types of lawsuits are typically brought by someone with a lot of money and a lot of resources, or an organization with a lot of money and a lot of resources who wants to silence someone who wants to keep them from speaking up. Because like I said, these lawsuits aren't designed to win, they're designed to bury someone, really. So there is a group called the Uniform Law Commission. They have a lot of good bills and they have a lot of bad bills, in my opinion. But they have hundreds of bills. So Uniform Law Commission, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a group of a bunch of policy experts and lawyers, and they come up with bills on anything you could think of. And they say, hey, we think this would be a good bill to pass in every state. Some of their bills I don't like, and some of them I do. So my anti-SLAP bill is the Uniform Law Commission bill. It's modeled after a bill that just passed in Utah last year and several other states. This anti-SLAP bill passed, and several other states are considering it right now as we are. It's kind of making its way through the state house. And the interesting thing is the genesis for this idea, for this anti-SLAP idea came, I was talking to a gentleman who works for a DC organization, I don't know, about a year and a half ago. And we were talking about some other things. I was doing some consulting basically with them. And he said, hey, Idaho is one of those states. Idaho is one of only 18 states with 0 anti-SLAP protection. And when you think about, no one knows people don't usually talk like that unless they're lawyers. But when you think about frivolous lawsuits, sham lawsuits, BS lawsuits, that's what normal people say. So I said, 8, so we don't have any protection? He's like, yeah. I started going down that rabbit hole and said, maybe we should do something about that. So last session, it was too late in the session to really get any traction. So that's why I introduced this bill this year. And the interesting thing I found as I've been kind of going down the rabbit hole, like I said, is this type of legislation, similar to what Heather was talking about, has support from the far left, the far right, and everyone in between. This is a bill, this type of bill, actually this specific bill, the ACLU supports it, which is like, how dare you run a bill that you're supposed to be conservative. But so does the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance, and so does the Institute for Free Speech, and every group you could think of in between, because free speech is the heart of essentially a representative republic. So if people value free speech on the left, on the right, generally speaking, I know we could get into it, but these types of lawsuits happen to people on the left, to people on the right. So this is one of those rare issues that has bipartisan support, and I'm hoping it will pass the Senate floor today. I think it will. I think the votes are there because this protects everyday Idahoans, me, you, everyone in this room, from just getting completely buried or having to take out a home equity loan to defend yourself in court because of a mean tweet. things like that. That's what we're talking about. It's not essentially a policy bill, it's just a process bill. So I've worked with the courts on it, I've worked with, the Idaho Supreme Court, on this. So if it passes, there will be a smooth transition, and they won't just be hit out of nowhere with, here's this new process you guys have to, enact. But if you think about it, I have this really cool flow chart, but then we'd be here till, I'm not gonna do the flow chart thing. If you think about it like an off-ramp, imagine you're on a highway, and the highway is you getting buried for 2 or 3 years in court and having to pay $100,000 in legal fees. That's the highway you're on this lawsuit. So what this bill does is very early on in the lawsuit, it creates an off-ramp. If the lawsuit is determined to be a slap lawsuit by the judge, the lawyers still have to be lawyers, the judge still has to be the judge. This just creates an off-ramp that says, hey, this lawsuit's not, it has no legal, has no legal viability. There's no case here at face value. This really isn't something you can sue someone for. So instead of having to go through years and months of court and litigation and lawyers' fees, a judge can decide if it's been shown early on to be illegitimate or meritless lawsuit. A judge can say, hey, we're just gonna end this thing now, and the defendant can be awarded legal fees, litigation fees for their trouble. So that's very high level what the bill does. And if someone say we're in court on day one, the plaintiff and the defendant, say the defendant says, hey, I think this is a slap lawsuit, let's do a timeout on the case. So this bill just says timeout before we go through discovery and all these expensive processes. But it can go either way. They can go through the phases, and the judge can say, no, this is a legitimate lawsuit, let's continue. And the court and the lawsuit continues if it is something that is legitimate. So it's something Idaho needs. We've been talking about, I forgot, someone, it's always in my head, this term lawfare. Have you guys heard that thrown around? Yeah. This bill it won't prevent it. Anyone can still sue anyone with this bill, but it would give people who are victims of a slap lawsuit and an easy out instead of going down the long legal highway. So that's, if you're really excited about watching the Senate floor debates and stuff, this should be up sometime 4:35 today if we get to it, unless Senator Hart argues for hours and hours and keeps us tied up and we can't get to it today.
That's my plan.
Yeah. So I was talking to someone who's been around politics in this building for a lot longer than me, and he said, whenever I could find a bill or an issue where you have the far left and the far right, like everybody agrees on it, he said, usually I would say, okay, I think this might be a good issue. So that's what this is. And yeah, if there's any questions, comments, concerns, I'd love to be hit with them. Yeah.
So, if similar laws exist in 64% of the states already, what argument can people give to oppose this? And also, to the previous discussion we had, this seems like an interesting question of who pays to pursue these lawsuits, because it costs other people a lot of money too.
So it was interesting because when I was putting this together and I put out a press release, I did all the, hey, I have this bill early, like in January, and there was no significant opposition or ideological, it was kind of like, I don't know how you can oppose this. That sounds really arrogant, but I was just like, I actually wanted to see like what problem would people have with this? And the only problems I've heard are more just misconceptions. Some of them are like, well, this is new, and this takes away the job of, some people thought it gave, so it's new. I mean, yeah, okay, it is new. But some of the arguments I've heard, and these weren't people who necessarily opposed it it was more just kind of like a little bit of pushback, not really opposition. But some people said, well, this gives people if this type of thing passes, it would give people a basically it would allow them to go off in public and defame and slander anyone they want, because they know if they get sued, they can just throw it out. And that's not the case. The bill does not change the definition of slander or defamation. So it doesn't change anything as far as policy. It just creates a new process. It's like putting another tool in the court's tool belts. Because some judges I've heard, people I know who've been involved in lawsuits, they said, my lawyer said the judge has their hands tied. They might have thrown this out earlier, but they have to go through all the motions before they can throw it out. So this just takes and again, I'm not a lawyer or even any legal background, but you can dismiss a lawsuit. Here's another thing I heard actually in opposition. Someone said, hey, we don't need this in Idaho because there's already a court, and this person's a lawyer, very smart legal guy. He said, I don't know if we need this because you can already dismiss a lawsuit in Idaho per court rule, subsection this, and that. And he said, yeah, so this feels like we don't need it. And I said, I understand what you're saying, but this court rule, and we talked a little bit, you can dismiss a lawsuit after you've already incurred legal fees and been tied up in court for months. So it's like, yeah, you can dismiss it, but the damage is already done at that point. What if you've already paid or you owe $100,000 in legal debt and you've been in court for 2 years, and then the lawyer goes, or the judge says, yeah, this case is dismissed. It's like, okay. So all this does is it takes it from the back end and puts it on the front end. If that makes sense. But that's kind of the only opposition I've heard. People think that's really it. I said this doesn't change the definitions of, like, if I go out and defame someone or slander someone, I'm still legally responsible for that. This catches those cases where, this has to deal with lawsuits that are not designed to win, actually. Some people will sue someone knowing they're gonna lose, but knowing that they're gonna bury someone in the process, so.
And so you said the judge is gonna be the one that would be able to, throw that out in the beginning.
Yeah.
That's correct?
Yeah. So
Isn't a lot of the lawfare going on right now in our nation involved the judicial system?
that's another rabbit hole. Yeah. So it still comes down to the man behind, it still comes down to the judge, is what I'm saying. So judges and lawyers still get to be judges and lawyers. So yeah, which illustrates why it's important to elect good judges.
Too bad it wasn't a panel. Get a little honesty in there.
Yeah.
We were gonna change that,
Change. What was the question?
electing good judges.
Oh, I'm not qualified to speak on that.
I just checked no on every single one to be.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But yes.
I'm sorry, I haven't read the bill yet.
Oh,
But is there a definition of, these, a lie or defamation? Because it seems like they're trying to change the definition of, for example, defamation.
So this bill doesn't, I just ran it, I wish I had it right in front of me. I have notes in front of me, I should probably put this in here before we go back to the floor. The bill doesn't change or modify the definition of slander or it doesn't change any of those definitions. Those are still what they are.
Okay, and how is that defined by, like in Webster? Just seems like.
It's in Idaho statute, so that's
Okay.
all of that just stays where it is.
Okay.
Yeah, so this doesn't touch definitions of anything like that.
Because it's already there.
Correct, yeah, exactly. I think we're good, Mr. Allman. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brian Lenney. It's always exciting to see what he's got up his sleeve here at the Capitol. I was actually going to invite one more person to come, but they weren't able to make it because I wanted to hear about a bill that is It actually made it to the floor briefly, and then it was sent back to committee. It's House Bill 517. And that bill would establish a mechanism, like Senator Lenney was saying, a policy, an off-ramp, or in this case an on-ramp, to allow people who believe that their constitutional rights, specifically the right to freedom of speech and the right to freedom of their religion, if they believe those rights have been violated by government, whether it's the state or county or cities, schools, any other publicly supported government entity, if they believe that those rights have been violated, then they could take the government to court and get redress for those actions. Because right now, if the government, does something to you to infringe on your freedom of speech, you can sue them in federal court under the First Amendment, but the route to suing them in state court is really difficult, and this would create a route for you to be able to do that, which in many cases would be similar, more straightforward, and faster than going through federal courts. If it seems like I know what I'm talking about here, it's only because I listened to the sponsors talk about this in committee. I'm definitely not an expert on it. But it was supported by people like the Pacific Legal Justice Institute. They defended, they take a lot of interesting cases, but recently they've been working with Travis Moore, the high school senior, or former high school senior now, who at Kellogg High School up north, he said to his classmates that guys are guys and girls are girls and there's no in between. And for that, he was sanctioned by his school district. They took away his ability to walk at graduation. And then, not only that, they doubled down. The very next day, community members came out in support of his rights. They had a rally, people just coming and speaking and waving American flags. A local bus driver, on his free time, came and carried an American flag at that rally, and he was summarily fired by the district. So those are the sorts of things that can happen and are happening. And so that bill, House Bill 517, was meant to provide redress for that. I am told, I texted one of the bill sponsors this morning and asked about it, and he said that they are working on it. They're fixing some language in there that might have been problematic, but it will be coming back this session. And so that's good. There's not much left of this session. So because we have a few more minutes, I just wanted to kind of share my thoughts on freedom of speech and where we stand today and how we got here. Now, it's interesting, people will talk about, say, George Carlin, who got in trouble because he said the 7 words you're not allowed to say on TV. Free speech used to be, something that it was all about transgression, finding those lines that you're not supposed to cross, saying things that are shocking or inappropriate or things like that. It's interesting to look back and see that throughout our country, even up until about the 1950s and 60s, many states still had blasphemy laws. They weren't enforced very often, but for a while they were there because the society decided, hey, there are certain things you can't say. Even though we have freedom of speech, there are still certain things you can't say. And we like to think we've grown beyond that, right? We've grown to the point where we believe that freedom of speech is a universal value that we all believe in. During the 1960s, you had the free speech movement coming out of Berkeley. People saying, I want to be able to speak my mind, and we agree. Let's speak. Let's be able to say what you want. But now we seem to have blasphemy laws again. If you say the wrong thing about, say, George Floyd, or about certain novel injections that will get you kicked off YouTube if I go into any more detail. If you for a while during the 2020 election, if you said anything about a certain laptop belonging to a certain politician's son, you could have gotten banned. Now you can say, well, that's a private company, but the release of the Twitter files demonstrated that the intelligence agencies and the federal government was involved in deciding what speech gets shut down. They had offices, they had back doors to Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Google, where they were telling these big tech companies, okay, these subjects are off limits. You need to shut people down if they bring these things up. And it happened. The New York Post had their Twitter account shut down because they posted a story about that laptop. It's the same thing with elections. They've redefined national security to mean that if you say anything that calls into question the legitimacy or the efficacy of mail-in voting, then you are a threat to democracy. It's not about free speech, according to them. It's about you're basically seditious, you're treasonous, you're trying to destroy our country. And so they justify shutting you down that way. So free speech is under assault from a lot of different directions. Recently, we saw a bill come through that tackled AI electioneering. So now, I have a little bit of fun on Twitter. I'll sometimes use AI to make different pictures. Sometimes they're silly. I try not to be too offensive. I just like to have fun. But there's a big worry that now with the rise of AI, you can make pictures and video that's almost indistinguishable from real life. And so this bill sought to crack down on that and said if you're a politician running for office, a candidate, and somebody makes an AI video and it's false, and they don't label it as AI, well then you can have a cause of action against them. And that's interesting. I get where they're coming from, but still, that's a pretty scary road to go down, isn't it? Because who decides what's AI? I mean, if it's literally indistinguishable from reality, what's to stop a candidate who gets an embarrassing video leaked from saying, "Oh, that's AI. They're just using that to discredit me"? What's to stop somebody from going after political cartoonists? The reason I use AI to make graphics on the internet is because I have no artistic talent at all. But there are cartoonists out there who make unflattering pictures of politicians and post it in newspapers and online. Are those illegal now? There's the federal government, after Biden took office, President Biden took office, prosecuted a young man named Doug Mackey. He was an anonymous poster on Twitter back during the lead up to when President Trump took office. And he posted very silly things. And one of the things he posted was the same joke that everyone posts every year, that if you want to vote for our candidate, you show up and vote. If you want to vote for the other candidate, you do it differently. In his case, he said that Hillary voters could text their vote instead of showing them the vote. It's a silly joke. I see people posting modifications of that every year around Election Day. Republicans come vote on this day, Democrats on that day. It's silly, it's dumb. But they decided to make an example of him, and they prosecuted him. They could have put him away for 10 years. They ended up putting him away for, I think, 7 months, if I recall right. So literally, they put someone in prison for making memes on the internet. They wanted to make an example of somebody who was making fun of their chosen candidate. And that's where a lot of our freedom of speech is being able to poke fun at our elected leaders. Because humor is one of the best ways to communicate things. It's a way where you can poke at the pretensions of people who, sometimes, present company accepted, so sometimes start to think that they're, above us. And I think humor is fun. People make fun of me, and I think it's funny. I try to make fun of myself before they can do that, just to take the wind out of their sails. But that's all about what free speech is. The social media, when it started, it was the public square. It's where people got together and shared ideas and threw out ideas and debated ideas and argued ideas. And in the last 10 years, we've seen it really crack down because the government's afraid of those ideas. People in power are afraid of the ideas being discussed. And when your government is starting to fear ideas, then that's a dangerous place to be. I'll take a question in just a moment. Just wanted to finish up my little spiel here by saying that I think the answer to speech is not censorship. It's not to try and uncover the people who are funding that speech necessarily. It's just more speech. If there's an idea out there that you disagree with, then share your own idea. Explain why it's wrong. Let's have a battle of ideas, not have this meta battle between about who donates to whom, or hey, that person who says this also said this over here, and therefore they're we need to cancel them. It's just have the debate. Yes, sir.
Yes, while you're talking, something went through my head. I served in Vietnam for people to be able to say what they feel. But at what point is it yelling fire in a crowded theater?
That's interesting.
At what point does that become the problem? Like you say, an AI and somebody puts it on there and you don't know if it's true or false. The person that put it on doesn't have to say, this is an AI, this is not factual, but it can hurt that candidate severely. That's yelling fire in a crowded theater.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up because I actually meant to mention the fire in a crowded theater. Supreme Court case actually held that it is constitutionally permissible to shot fire in a crowded theater because sometimes there is a fire. And the problem comes when you say things that are obviously false and meant to incite, say, violence or panic. Shouting fire in a crowded theater when there is no fire and there's no fire, that is a problem. And courts have held that we don't have the freedom to incite violence. I can't, stand up to a crowd of people and say, go hurt somebody. That would cross the line, and I would be liable for that. The questions of AI and what's real and who decides what's real, that's really the question. Who decides? What organization, what body, what section of government do we put in charge of deciding whether speech is true or false? And that's, I don't really have an easy answer to how we determine, what to do about people who are knowingly putting false information out there. But at the same time, I don't necessarily trust the government to decide who's true and who's false. We've seen what that happens. We've seen what it looks like when that happens with, say, the Hunter Biden laptop. The government decided it was false, even though it was actually true, and they worked with big tech to shut down your ability to talk about it. Ma'am. Yes.
Basically, I just wanted to ask isn't there a way that there could be a stamp on what is AI?
A watermark.
A watermark.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know, something that to let people know.
Can there be a watermark on AI generated content? Yes, there can be.
I mean,
There's no
should there be?
Should there be? Maybe, but again, who's going to enforce that?
I don't know, I mean, it's, yeah.
And that's the other side of the debate over AI and videos and things, is that a lot of times it's not that there's somebody who who is posting this and saying, I made this. It's that somebody makes something, releases it on Twitter or, on the depths of the internet, on various message boards, and then it gets shared and shared and shared. And by the time it goes viral, nobody knows really where it came from. And that's the question. And that's where I think bills that enforce prohibitions against that will, it has a loophole because who knows where they actually came from.
Is it possible that the free market could develop some answers to the AI problem and free market solution could fix this?
Is it possible that the free market can develop an answer to the AI problem? I think that's what it's going to have to be. Every single communications technology has scared people in power, I think. There was a time when the printing of books was kept closely controlled because you don't want those crazy ideas getting out there to regular people. And then we had radio and television and internet and cell phones. And this AI revolution is just the latest iteration of that. How long have news media, CBS, NBC, ABC, the big three networks, how long have they been able to manipulate public opinion by showing videos that are either edited or taken from a certain perspective or taken out of their context and put in a different context? And I assume they've been doing that for a long time, ever since television and video technology was invented. And so this is just yet another evolution of technology, and we the people are going to have to adapt to perhaps be a little more skeptical about what we see on the screen and be more discerning about what we repost and dig in deeper to figure out where something came from and why it's being said. And we're just going to have to catch up to technology, I think. Do you have a question?
That's propaganda.
Oh, propaganda, yeah. The funny thing about the word propaganda is that it's not necessarily a negative word. It just means the propagation of information. It's taken on a negative connotation, but everything is propaganda. Advertising is propaganda, trying to get you to buy a product or get you to buy the lifestyle that their product promises. So, we're inundated with information more than any other moment in human history. And I think we as a species, as a civilization, are not quite caught up to the ramifications of that yet. We're going to have to figure it out. So, hey, I appreciate you. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. What do you say about the government getting involved in banning DEI? Because that's, that can be considered as, speech too. And I know the lefties will use that argument against conservatives when we promote free speech and we say we need more free speech, and that the answer is more speech, right? And then they target us saying, well, you what about you guys trying to ban diversity, equity, and inclusion in public schools and, I guess businesses now too, and so yeah, I'm just kind of curious about your thought process about how you consider that.
This interesting question about banning DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Idaho Freedom Foundation has done a lot of reports on DEI in schools and universities, and I think that's where the line would be drawn as far as advocacy for going against that, is this something that's taxpayer supported? Are our taxes going to fund this, which in the case of DEI, we believe that it's discriminatory. It's even though it says inclusion, it's deliberately exclusionary because it's prioritizing people by by race, by gender, by status, by other things instead of just giving everybody a fair chance. And if businesses want to do that, then I think the response is to say go for it, and it's up to customers to take their business elsewhere if they don't like it. But in the case of public schools and universities and government offices, that's where it's, these are our tax dollars going to support this. And so we as people, groups such as IFF, as think tanks and policy centers and legislators, I think have a role in saying, wait, we're not going to support this. We're not going to fund this. That's the government putting their thumb on the scale rather than just keeping their thumbs off the scale and letting the cream rise to the top. Any other questions? I appreciate giving me the chance to get up here and talk a little bit. Thank you for coming to Capital Clarity. Yes, Mr.
Brian, can I just make a comment?
Yes.
My name is Russ Smurs, and I'm a citizen activist. And living in Idaho is one of the greatest things that will ever happen to us. We won the lottery when we moved to Idaho. Probably half of us from California, like myself. This is a citizen legislature. You can go up and talk to these people like Phil Hart or Mr. Denny, and they'll listen to you. If I don't know, your question as far as IFF, I'm also, by the way, a board member on Idaho Freedom Action, which is a part of IFF. And we do make a difference, the citizens. If you're sitting in this room right now, you're an activist. You want to know what's going on. And that's terrific. This room should be packed 100%, standing room only for questions like Heather has here. I've never been sued, at least for anything I've said as far as giving testimony to the legislature. But if I am, damn it, I'll fight that fight.
Thank you. That's a great point that, it's a citizen legislature. These organizations that are involved in politics are made up of citizens. They run on donations from citizens, and it's up to citizens to be involved. And that's why we put on this program. We invite you to come, and like Russ said, we like to see it packed in here because our government only works when people get involved. Otherwise, it's just a handful of people deciding things for the rest of us. And that's what I've loved about Idaho, is that our legislators are accessible. They're here. They're willing to talk. They're willing to listen. And it really is a great situation here for the taking. All you have to do is show up. So I appreciate everybody who showed up. I appreciate all those who are watching online or catching this later. Remember, you can go to capitalclarity.com to see what our next event will be. We're here every Thursday at noon while the session lasts, so we've got a few more weeks, and I will see you next week.